Coming to Kickstarter this June, Shawn at Death's Door. The man who rules the world takes on the Greek god of death in this action-packed all-new John Haynes comic book. Get your copy of the standard and variant editions of John Haynes at Death's Door and lots of other great stretch goal rewards on Kickstarter this June. Hi everyone, it's Shawn here with a comic review video. And before I give you a review of one of the best comics of 2022, Tyler Martin's The Antagonist #4, I want to give everybody an update on my upcoming comic, John Haynes at Death's Door. Now, the John Haynes at Death's Door comics art has been complete for about 2 weeks now, and I just got back all the pages from the letterer, so all of the lettering and the art on the John Haynes at Death's Door comic is complete. So right now I am doing research on printers, and I'm trying to find the best printer to produce the John Haynes at Death's Door comic. So on June 22nd, when you put in your pledge, you are going to be able to get a copy of John Haynes at Death's Door in paper or digital format, because everything is complete at this point, and all I have to do is submit the files to the printer. So you can feel comfortable about putting in a pledge for John Haynes at Death's Door. The book's art and lettering is complete, and all you're going to have to do is just sit after you put in your pledge is wait for the book to be shipped directly to you, because everything is done at this point, and all I'm waiting for is enough pledges to be able to do the printing and the shipping. Now, with that perfunctory done, I want to get into one of the best comics of 2022 that I picked up on Kickstarter. Now, I picked up the first 3 issues of Tyler Martin's The Antagonist, and I absolutely loved the setup for this 4th issue that I read in the first 3 issues. And those first 3 issues introduced us to the evil family, which consists of Destructus and Ultima, the mother and father of the 3 children who make up the antagonist, and shows them practically rebuilding their lives after waging a campaign to overthrow the U.S. government and killing the greatest hero of this universe, the American. Now, 20 years in the aftermath of that whole plan to take over the United States, we have the evils living in Detroit. And they've been living a very quiet life until an incident that took place at the wife's place of work, and that seems to have opened the door for the government to come after the evil family. Now, this 4th issue is, as I see it, one of the best comics of 2022, and the action in this comic, once it starts, it is right there on the point of great movies like Terminator 2 Judgment Day, and the artwork really reminds me of many of the great comics I read back in the day, like the Jim Shooter, George Perez, Avengers, the Chris Claremont and John Byrne, X-Men, and it also reminded me of the Marv Wolfman, George Perez, Teen Titans. This book has really high-quality storytelling and incredible art, and it's a comic I would definitely recommend you pick up, because it's just that great comic. I mean, this is one of the best comics I have read in a long time, and you will not be disappointed by this 4th issue. Now, this 4th issue opens up with a sequence with them going to one of these sites that in Colorado for this action organization, and this guy who works for the director runs into one of these agents who is using supervillains as his own personal job squad. Now, he makes a promise that he will let these villains have their freedom if they kill him, but we know that this is just him just being full of it, and basically he just wants to be able to test his powers by using supervillains as cannon fodder. Now, I would have liked to have known about this Dr. Lupin, Raptor, and the Milkman. They have very interesting designs, but sadly they are just jobber fodder, and this jobber fodder really winds up again dead meat. Now, the after making these guys dead meat, the director's little lackey has a meeting with this white guy, and this white guy wants to learn more about the evils, and he gives them some. This guy gives them some information to go to their house. Now, this is where the story really starts to build, because we don't see what's coming, because as we're sitting here with the evils and they're having this breakfast with this white American family and on the anniversary of the death of the American, we really don't know if this is just a family from the block or this is a group of spies sent by the director. So that's a critical question that really doesn't get answered in this story, but it's one I really think would be a very interesting one as related to the story. Now, as they're having this breakfast with this family and they're sitting there talking about the death of the American, we have the evil's son. He's sitting there with this young lady, and they're just talking about his wanting to accomplish more. And it's a very interesting scene that sets up something later in the story that is very powerful and compelling. One of the best sequences comes up, and I don't want to give it away just yet, but as he's sitting there talking to her, it's just one of those moments in life you take for granted until you see this great tragedy that befalls the evil family. Now, this whole sequence, as everybody's just talking, it feels like something very surreal. It really reminded me like the day before 9/11, which was a day after my birthday. And I remember that day just being so serene and so quiet and so peaceful until the carnage of the 9/11 tragedy came along. And this whole sequence really took me back to that, because just as, the evil's son is sitting there with this young woman and they're just sitting there talking, all of a sudden the house just explodes around them, and all of a sudden there are soldiers basically shooting up the place. And this whole sequence, it reminds me of two different comic book eras. I mean, the shock and surprise of this page really takes me back to, I remember it was the issue before the Bride of Ultron started, when Ultron came into the Avengers Mansion and basically blew a hole in the Avengers Mansion, shocking everyone. I remember picking up that issue as a kid and just being blown away by it, and this page really partially reminded me of that sequence where Ultron busts in Avengers Mansion and proceeds to take out the Avengers. Now, it also reminds me of what I saw on the Invincible television show, but what I love is how well executed this scene is, because it just comes out of nowhere and shows us, the horrors of war as related to superheroes, because basically this is like a war sequence, and it just chills you with emotion, because you see that, this can just come out of nowhere, and how life can just change out of nowhere. I mean, just that's how haunting this whole scene in this one page is, and it basically sets up a lot of what's to come, and what's to come again shows you how how a life can change in basically nowhere. And that's where the power of the emotion comes from these two couple of pages. It's just very powerful to me. I mean, here's a guy, he's just sitting here talking about the death of this superhero from 20 years ago, and then his whole entire life is upheaved in just a few minutes. I mean, it's just very shocking. I mean, some people would say it's that the characters reap what they sow, but it's just you never see it coming, and that's what makes it not only an extremely powerful sequence, but a very haunting one, because you go from people eating breakfast to people basically fighting for their lives. And what happens to Trey Evil in a scene coming up, I mean, it's just a very powerful scene. I mean, this scene where you see him he's sitting there, he's just talking to this girl one minute, and the next minute she's dead and the mirror is in her throat. And I mean, this right here and is again a very emotional scene, because he's fighting for somebody's life, and then there's this guy in the corner, and he's basically just smoking a cigar like he doesn't care. And it just shows us the contrast between life and death, and it's a very powerful scene. And all of these pages, again, very powerful in showing us that 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 even though the evils are supposed to be the bad guys, the government, which is supposed to be the good guys, don't look too good because they don't really, neither side really cared about the human cost. I mean, the human cost is shown to us in Trey, in trying to save a life and trying to preserve a life. And we see this guy, he doesn't care about life. We see the evils, they're dealing with the consequences of their actions. I mean, this is powerful and compelling storytelling. I mean, I have not seen storytelling like this in years in a comic, and this one really puts it up there. I don't want to give away too much of this comic. I think I gave away already too much of it, but I don't want to give away too much of the antagonist. But this fourth issue, it's powerful. I just have to say that. I mean, it will stimulate. It's just an incredibly well done fourth issue, and this type it gives you everything you want in a truly great comic. Lots of action, lots of story, and gives us great character development. And it also shows us the humanity of many of these characters. I mean, I believe that the kids, this is their first exposure to the horrors of war, and this is going to, as I see it, scar these children for life. I mean, if you're a kid and you're just living your life like the evil kids were, and you're just dealing with your powers, this makes it where it gives you some perspective on those powers and makes you think about how you want to use your powers. I mean, in this book, it's not looking like the government looks like a bunch of good guys. This director doesn't look like a good guy because he's on the same wavelength of the by any means necessary that the Destructus and Ultima were. And when you're on those roads, you don't really care about the human cost. And what I liked is that Tyler Martin did a great job of showing us the human cost as related to the people's lives in this type of thing, because we see in many shows like Invincible, they show us a lot of gore, but they don't really show us the substance, and Tyler Martin does an amazing job of showing us the substance of how a person's life can change as related to this type of violence and this zero-sum, by any means necessary, we're doing the right thing, good guy. This type of extremist mindset does harm to everyone, and when you have no ethics, you can harm the very people you're trying to so-called help, and this mindset is detrimental to everyone. And I love how he put everything together in this fourth issue to show us how, two wrongs don't make a right, and how evil for evil doesn't lead to anything good coming out of this situation. I mean, the evil's entire life is basically upended in this fourth issue, and this fourth issue will have you anticipating the months to come, and when the fifth issue and the sixth issue drop. I mean, in this issue, I wasn't really seeing how these family of supervillains were the bad guys, because the so-called good guys show us how unethical they are, and both sides show us that if this is good and evil, then what really is good and what really is evil? I mean, Antagonist number 4 really is a thought-provoking comic. It is one of the best comics I have read this year, and it's one I highly recommend you pick up. And I was glad I was able to pick this one up on Kickstarter and put in a pledge for it. And I definitely hope you guys will continue to put in pledges for the Antagonist. And I hope you guys pick up the Antagonist TV show when it supposedly is supposed to come to Netflix. I highly recommend you get Antagonist number 4. It is one of the best comics of 2022, and I'd have to say it's one of the best comics I've read in a long time, because it captures the spirit of old school action-packed comics, and it also shows us the dark modern world that heroes and villains live in today. Now, my upcoming comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, will be coming to Kickstarter on June 22nd, and until then, you can catch up on John Haynes' story on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format, with The Temptation of John Haynes, The Man Who Rules the World, and the previous 4 books in the John Haynes series. And if you want to see me make more comic review videos of great comics like Tyler Martin's The Antagonist, you can donate to my Patreon, my PayPal, or my Cash App and that will allow me to go out here and put in more pledges on more great comics like Tyler Martin's The Antagonists. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, E-Steam Horror of the Hyena Woman. Hell's aspiring angel takes on a wicked werewolf in this action-packed all-new E-Steam series adventure. Get E-Steam Horror of the Hyena Woman in paperback and e-readers today.